Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yuz Yusof. I'm a consultant rheumatologist in Leeds. I'm reporting for Room Now in sunny Barcelona to cover the EULAR 2025 Congress. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Chris Wincup, who is a consultant rheumatologist from King's College London Hospital. He's one of the experts in the field of CAR T cell therapies, and he'll be able to enlighten us more about the breakthrough during this Congress. Hi, Chris.
Hi, it's nice to see you. Thanks very much for the invitation to be here.
Yes, and thank you so much for joining us. So as we all know, that CAR T cell therapies has been taken to storm since Professor George Shedd announced the initial results back in 2022. And now 3 years on, the race is on for the first CAR T cell therapies, hopefully to be licensed for the treatment of refractory systemic lupus erythematosus. So Chris, there's so many abstract around data showing some results. Can you please summarize some of the results that that caught your eyes in the forest?
Yeah, thanks, you. So it's really interesting, and clearly this area has really expanded or even exploded since that original data of the first five patients published in Nature Medicine a few years ago, as you highlight. The thing that really is striking for me is that there are a number of people working in this field, and there's a lot of innovation going on. I certainly feel that since ACR last year, things have progressed hugely. And if we think back to EULAR last year, things are almost unrecognizable. So we're all pretty familiar now in the lupus field of CD19 directed autologous CAR T cell therapy. It's really exciting to see other targets for autologous CAR T cell therapy, but also the allogeneic forms coming through, which have the benefit of potentially being more off the shelf, more easily available, more scalable. The data is still awaited to see whether they're as effective. And I think that it's also interesting to see other cell types. So it's not just CAR T, we're thinking about CAR NK cells now. And it's fantastic to see that we were in a very small area a few years ago. And now we're asking a lot of very, very interesting questions. So I think that one of the real key things to look out for at EULAR this year and for coming years is what's being effective, why is it being effective, why may certain treatments be better than others. But I also think importantly, what happens in patients who don't respond, what happens in patients who relapse. I think we'll learn a lot from that. So we're seeing a lot of great data in terms of the ongoing efficacy of these therapies. We clearly need this long-term data to tell us, is this going to be a long-term effective therapy? Is the long-term safety good? And that will give us a much better position of where we're going to be as this approaches potentially going into clinical care in many years' time.
So for generalists or our audience and potentially just general rheumatologists. So when we then read through all this abstract at EULAR, so what are the your tips that you want to share, things that to look up for in order to help us to interpret this data?
Great. I think there's some really important work that needs to be spoken to here, which is how CAR T cell therapy is delivered. So, first of all, CAR T cell therapy is a long way removed from what many of us as rheumatologists are used to dealing with in phase 3 clinical trials of biologics, where you have a patient who comes in, they receive an infusion, it might be the drug, it might be placebo, and then the patient goes home. This is very, very different. First of all, the overwhelming majority of these studies are not placebo controlled at the moment. It's still relatively early stage, but you're looking at patients actually getting the treatment when they come in. Second of all, is this treatment is intensive. This is not something that the patient comes in, they have an infusion, they go home the same day, and you repeat this month on month. This is something that patients really need to be locked into for the long term. Patients will require an admission to hospital for a period of observation, which currently is between 10 and 14 days, to make sure that there are no commonly reported side effects of the therapy. But it doesn't end when they leave hospital. They also have to stay close by to the hospital for a period of up to a month afterwards. And I think it's really important when considering this original data is that patients have to go through quite a lot of intensive workup to receive this therapy. This is very far removed from what we used to do with monoclonal antibody therapies. I think that we really need to consider this for anyone that's thinking about enrolling patients into CAR T cell trials, for anyone who's running these trials or referring patients to these trials, is you need to speak about that with the patient because this is going to take time. This is going to be an inconvenience for patients. And the thing that I really find quite striking, particularly at EULAR and speaking to many colleagues, is that we're already trying to think of ways of how we can deliver this therapy very differently for autoimmune indications. Clearly, you and I, as lupus specialists, don't want to be in a position in 10 years' time where we can only treat patients who are able to afford time off work, be admitted to hospital, and receive this potentially very transformative treatment, and then have patients who are unable to access their treatment still getting the standard of care that we're offering today. So I think one of the things that I'm really picking up and I'm trying to say with colleagues is we need to think about this therapy. It's not a therapy that we should be thinking about in a small number of patients. If it's effective, we need to find a way of delivering it to those of greatest need. And my optimism is that I think that a number of people are looking at ways of innovating the therapy to try and scale this up, whether that's through using allogeneic, off-the-shelf type treatments, whether it's looking at bypassing the need for apheresis, whether it's looking at differences in conditioning or actually reducing inpatient stay so you can almost ambulate this therapy. It's important to emphasize this is early phase studies. The long-term safety needs to come out. The long-term efficacy needs to come out. We are debating about who is this for? How many patients is this for? And I think it's only when we get that long-term safety and efficacy data that you and I will be able to decide, is this something we're using as a salvage treatment for really sick refractory patients? Or is this something that you may be looking at more moderate disease? And we will find out a lot more about that as this data comes through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's still in, up in the air, what sort of patients that we're gonna, put them through. And also what you touched just now, that, the patient need to be ready as well, physically and mentally and psychologically for this treatment. Yeah. So just touching on that, because there's so many data going on as well, and some have sort of more longer follow-up. How close are we in terms of, getting the first one, license? And also, do you know what's the regulatory behind it? Because certainly, it's probably going to be different compared to other therapies that which can have larger scale phase 3 kind of thing. But yeah, so what's your view on that, Chris?
So I think we're discussing this quite a lot, and I think we need to learn from the oncologists in terms of how they've got these therapies licensed. I mean, how do you do a placebo-controlled trial of cell therapies? I mean, I think CAR T cell therapy is very, very difficult to do so. My personal feeling is if you need to put a degree of randomization into this, then I would suggest that maybe you have a crossover trial where you randomize against standard of care. And if you don't get sustained remission, you may then be eligible for the treatment. And I think ethically, we need to think about this as well. We know that many patients are very enthused by the early data, which we hope will be borne out in the longer term data. But if you offer a patient a cellular therapy, many of them are saying, well, I would very much like to get the cellular therapy. So how do you find a way of doing a trial that allows the patient to get access to this treatment and that they don't withdraw from the trial because they happen to get randomized to standard of care? Now, we're still a long way from the point of thinking about a phase 3 trial, but I think that we are in a position now where we need to start thinking about, if these results are borne out, how do we get this to license? Clearly, the clinical trials are looking at patients very, very sick and refractory disease with multiple therapies. And my personal feeling is that was always going to be the case when you saw the original data. However, if we were to design a study for treating patients with lupus with cellular therapies, would you really pick the patient who is perhaps the sickest on the most background therapy, the highest risk of that patient perhaps and developing harm from this therapy, and with T cells that are perhaps the most abnormal physiologically? And so I think there's got to be a degree of creativity here in terms of what's the patient population. And I think that will be informed by a lot more of our translational research. And we may see the phase 3 trials look very different from what we're seeing in these early phase studies. And this all obviously is very dependent on the duration of effect and the long-term safety. And I think we are really still dependent on that before we think about this coming through to treating patients as a standard of care.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I've got one last question, before we wrap up. So as you said, compared to last ACR and to now, there've been so many advances. They're now, shorter manufacturing time for the, for the car, and also, no apheresis, and potentially not using any chemotherapy as well. There's so many things happening, now. What else do you think will be in terms of like pipeline, like future approach for car-based therapies? Do you think like, maybe next year EULAR that we will be surprised to get them?
So I think the thing that's coming quickly on its heels, and I think, I look at myself as someone who looks after lupus patients, we often copy what hematology did many years ago, and we're now starting to copy not only the B-cell depleting monoclonal antibodies, but the CAR T-cell therapies. And the one that came relatively quickly after that was these bispecific or T-cell engaging therapies. And we're seeing an expansion in this area as well. So I think it's really interesting that we're looking at CAR T-cell therapy and you and I are very happy to see that there are new monoclonal antibodies that are getting licensed for lupus. You add into that T cell engagers that may be delivered slightly more conventionally, slightly less hospital admission. And you suddenly look at the armory of what we can treat lupus with, we're going to have to work out what goes where. I think one of the other things that we need to look at is I don't think this is going to be a one-time cure for every single patient. We have no drug in medicine that cures 100% of patients 100% of the time. And those patients who don't respond are going to be really interesting for us. You might pick up B cell signals or other immune cell signals in patients post-treatment long before they flare. And I think when we find those signals, that will give us a clue as to perhaps where we need to target therapeutics in future. So it's exciting to be here talking about new biologics, CAR T cell therapy, other types of cellular therapy. But I think physiologically and pathophysiologically, we're going to learn a lot with these treatments. And in the best case, people respond well. But in those patients who unfortunately don't respond well, we may find other targets and other better ways of treating patients with lupus in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's really sum up our discussion today. And certainly a holistic approach and also personalized approach is needed to care our patients with lupus. So thank you, Chris, for your time to be interviewed today. And thank you everyone for listening. And you can follow us, the room now that's available in various media outlets, including X, YouTube, Facebook, and etc. For more content coverage for EULAR 2025. Till we meet again. Bye, everyone.